So tell me if I'm right. But today we have a very special guest. As you can see below me at this angle is Mr. Steven. Steven and I are pretty good friends. We go back. We met in like 2014 at the very same, very long internment job of it was basically some good old-fashioned Christian slave labor together. So we have that in common. You know, we got the same amount of whippings. But but at first, so yeah, we're just going to discuss, you know, kind of some open topics. We're going to be talking about, you know, Stephen's evolution of his theology, how he grew up, how he's going now, and kind of just pick and prod like what's wrong with America, which is my favorite thing to talk about of all time. So let's start with Brooke. Brooke, what's going on in your world?
What's happening, guys? What's happening? Stephen, thanks very much for joining us today. This is going to be quite an exciting trip because people's journeys of faith are so interesting to me, especially the evolution. So I'm looking forward to your story. I'm doing well. I'm still unpacking. As you see, more garbage behind me. I've got some trash over here, a massive cardboard thing. I might actually start using the cardboard thing as a background for my videos and such. So yeah, that's been pretty good. I'm still waiting on some artwork. I got a great picture of from The Wolf of Wall Street with Leonardo DiCaprio snorting crack off of some stripper's ass. Or it was like snorting coke or something. I'm like, yeah, I'm going to put that right by the door as I come in. Like, this is my place. This is the future that libertarians everywhere want, you know? But other than that, I'm looking forward to today's show. We are a couple men down. We have to find a replacement for our brother Bobby. You know, he was our resident Catholic. Our brother Amos is out having the time of his life in Ohio, and I hear it's quite a party. You know, a little, you know, something's going on. You know, strippers and blow, as the Libertarian parties like to do it. And he's hanging out with Spike, which is the VP candidate for the Libertarian Party. Let's just hope our boy survives. How are you doing, Corey?
Oh, man, yeah. I'm doing good. I have a very fun, long history with horrible back problems. And we're starting round 3 yesterday. So that'll be fun. Thankfully, I've done enough of the physical therapy and the doctors and yada, yada crap that I'm kind of just going to wing it my own now. I feel like I got enough treatment absorption that I could deal with it. But it's at literally the worst time possible because I am also moving. But part of my house's stipulations is I have to do some of the repairs before closing. So
before closing, okay.
Yeah. And it's part of the stipulations of the whole appraiser FHA, like you were required to do these, and some of them's like mowing the lawn. It's dumb as hell, but they put that as a mandatory requirement. I've never had to mow someone's lawn that in a house that I don't own yet, so that'll be a unique experience. I actually just hired a mutual friend of Steven and ours to trim all the trees, and they got that done yesterday. Yeah, so that's pretty sick. Ben? Yeah. So I still haven't gotten around to paying him yet. I was planning on meeting him there and helping him out, but back. So I'm just going to throw some cash at him next time I see him. So it's good. So Steven, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us what's going on in your neck of the woods.
All right. Well, I'm Steven. I am from Chattanooga, Tennessee, and I am currently living in Kansas City, Missouri, and working my ass off. And trying to make it through a pandemic and all those other wonderful things. So that's about the gist of who I am. I just moved into this new house, renting out with a friend of mine, a mutual friend of Corey and I, that we also met at the same mental health care facility, ministry, conglomerate, chaotic piece of shit. And so that's just that's about the gist of life right now. Working hard, studying general psychology online, and doing what I can. So
yeah, all of our friend group essentially all came from that same place, and I think we just have our own. We all bonded through like survivor's guilt, I think. So
it's that awesome. It's the soldier in the trenches thing. It's like, I don't even have to like you, I don't have to care about you, but we're here getting shot at together, so we're friends. You know,
exactly. That's pretty much what happened. Yeah, pretty much the vast majority of our friends group all came from that same internship. I use that as loosely as possible. All right. So we're talking right now about. So we've all, Brooke and I and our other guest hosts that are all gone at the moment, we've all kind of done our Batman origin stories of where we started in our faith, what kind of faith did we grow up in and how it's evolved over time to where we got now, where everybody hates us. So if you would love to tell us your Batman origin story, Stephen, of your theology journey, I think yours is very interesting. So
oh my goodness, when you say everyone hates us, I feel that. I totally feel that right now.
Welcome to the club, brother.
So let's it starts in the foothills of Tennessee, growing up in a lower middle class white Southern family that was primarily Pentecostal in origin. So we were going to a Baptist church for a little bit because it made my mom more comfortable. But eventually my dad went out and we started going to this Pentecostal church. And that was kind of where we stayed for the rest of the time that I was with my family. It was in this hyper Pentecostal, super hyper conservative movement that had a lot of purity culture, a lot of really interesting beliefs. It was Sundays would be filled with a lot of speaking in tongues, a lot of screaming, and charismaticism. That was extremely influential in the way that I developed as a human later on in life. And it's just especially during my teenage years when I was experiencing a lot of depression and anxiety and all this stuff, and then I had a family who was very much against any type of care or help because any type of therapy, it wasn't allowed. In fact, I was also homeschooled. This was fun. We used to work through the Abeka books, and there was nothing about psychology mentioned anywhere because that particular school system believes that psychology is a demonic science. Right. So you were not to study psychology. It was just the devil's way of trying to manipulate the masses. And so there was a lot of talk of Satan and different things going on, like workings in the world. And in fact, it would enter into my personal life when I experienced what I like to refer to as mini exorcisms. If there was anything that my parents didn't like, there was something that needed to be cast out. So I remember multiple times my mom getting in my face with her, just like, I rebuke that spirit of rebellion and all sorts of different stuff. And I'm like, oh my goodness, I didn't take the dishes out of the dishwasher. I'm sorry.
Sounds like Satan.
It's the devil. So there was a lot of different super emotional stuff that went on there. But as a kid, you buy a lot of that hook, line, and sinker. You don't really, you follow along with your parents and you trust them. But there was always that tinge of like, some of this just feels off. So
I was going to ask, how deep does that go? Did it go into the obvious joke is like Pokemon cards, right? Are those from Satan as well?
Well, it was connected to Magic the Gathering, which my mom discovered through research. So she didn't want me summoning demons. And then she found out later that these were just Japanese demons anyway. So
it doesn't count.
Yeah, it's American-made demons, not the real stuff.
It's even worse. But it's lower quality. You just can't go with that. It's unpatriotic demons. But I wasn't allowed to watch Power Rangers. I wasn't allowed to do a lot of these different things. Harry Potter was absolutely out of the question.
Oh yeah.
My parents had a recorded VHS of John Hagee Ministries.
Oh wow!
Speaking against all the evils of Harry Potter, and so it was not great. So it was a really kind of a rough upbringing because my dad was a bit of an abusive person in terms of emotional and psychologically abusive, very manipulative. The kind of person you don't know how short his fuse is going to be today. So I remember very distinctly, just sitting in my room, I would remember I would feel his truck pulling into the driveway, and I would just naturally go over and shut the door because any barrier I could set up was necessary. Yeah. So, and with a lot of that was this whole concept of everything is your fault. You're not religious enough. You're not praying enough. You're not being spiritual enough. You're just not relying on Jesus. That's why you're depressed. And all this other stuff that just nightmarish. And then all the while, my parents having their severe struggles, my mom having emotional breakdowns and anxiety attacks. And it was just a kind of a chaotic upbringing. And just kind of compiled with, I'm not really leaving that environment. I'm homeschooled and I'm kind of just there all the time. And so the only time I was ever away from that was going to youth group, which was kind of an outlet for me, or then going to work, which I loved work because it got me out of all this nastiness. And I got a little bit of money so I could go and do things that I wanted to do. And it got to the point where it's just like I would get punished by them like banning me from going to youth group. Like, well, you're not going to church this week. Okay, great. That's real Christian of you.
Yeah. So they're saying you're not Jesus enough, and then they're banning you from the place where they tell you about Jesus.
Yeah, and often
seems legit.
Any type of expression of anger was basically a sin against my parents. And they're like, well, are you even a Christian? Well, I thought I was. Well, maybe I'm not. I don't know. There's a lot of questions going on here. And it's very frustrating, but you weren't allowed to be expressive or have any type of personal autonomy or anything like that. It was like, if they were angry, they were justified. If I was angry, I was sinning against them and they were going to get angry. So there's just like secular, just like awful experience, which I eventually had the joy of getting away from by going to college, which I went to a Christian college, but it was a non-denominational school. And of course, I got all sorts of warnings about going to college and how an education could, wreck my theology, and like the devil is there trying to tempt me away from the truth of God and all this stuff like that. But that was the point where I started, first of all, getting to kind of a comparison of what I had experienced growing up and what other people were experiencing. And that got the wheels turning. And I started experiencing a lot of other denominations, because mostly, like with Pentecostals, we were the minority in this religious spectrum. It was mostly Presbyterians and Baptists who thought that when I said Pentecostalism, I meant that I was going to handle snakes and that I only believed. And they also thought I was a monist, a mono, like no Trinitarian thing. And I was just, like, I was just like, that was like foreign to me, because thankfully my church was not a snake handling church, but there were definitely some around. I knew they existed, but oh my goodness, if my family went to snake handling church, it would have been bad for me. So that was kind of like the entryway into getting the hell out of that experience. But I stayed in that church until I graduated college.
Was that your choice then? Like, you wanted to go to college, or you wanted to escape and chose college?
I wanted to go to college because while everyone was warning me about being afraid and stuff, my family was very adamant about me going to college.
Okay.
It's like, you have to go to college. My dad never finished his degree. My mom dropped out because my dad made her to raise the family and all this stuff. My grandfather never got his degree, and my grandfather was a wonderful person who liked to motivate you by saying, oh, an A+, well, that's not good enough. You can do more. And he was very insistent that I go to college. He said, you need to be the first person in generations to get a degree. You need to go get a degree. It's imperative that you do this, and education's important. So I really appreciate that I did have people in my life who were very insistent on education, even if some of them also were a little bit two-faced and were like, now be careful. So,
okay, that's positive in that respect. So like when you reached college, what was your first culture shock when it came to the faith? Was there somebody that you met that kind of shook things up for you?
Oh man. My friend Tiller from Savannah, Georgia, he was the first Calvinist I had ever met.
Oh,
and he was I was extremely reserved from people. I kind of stayed away a lot from people. I was a bit of a hermit on campus, but he was very intentional, and we ended up building like a friend group that they would just have theology talks all the time, and I would just kind of sit and listen because I wanted to hear what they had to say, but I didn't feel like I had anything to contribute to the conversation. I'm like, well, this is so much new stuff that I really just need to sit aside and listen to what's going on here. Also, you're crazy, but so
it's a good attitude.
yeah. And so just kind of getting his experience, because he grew up Baptist, but a very Armenian Baptist. And my words today. It's early.
Great time to do a podcast.
So here I was just thinking like, oh, free will and stuff. And then he comes in with predestination and like all these different things, and like a very philosophical mind. And on top of that, he loved to argue. And I think one of the things that, amen. I think he was a little surprised when he realized he couldn't entice me into an argument. He couldn't get me there. And so he would just have these conversations with me, and then he would start. This was also the first experience of someone who was a Christian who also thought drinking was okay and cussing was good. And so
as a Calvinist, wow.
Yeah. So we were having these wonderful conversations, and he's like, sometimes you really need to communicate what you're saying. And so you're going to say ass. And I'm like, okay, cool, whatever. So
that's pretty cool.
At first, did you feel like he was leading you to sin by saying that?
In the beginning, maybe.
Yeah.
I was a little bit. Yeah. Early on, I was a little bit. And part of me was like, oh, man, this liberal, crazy person, he doesn't know Jesus. But I've always been a bit of an empathetic person, and also one to be willing to give someone the benefit of the doubt. And so even if I thought internally like, oh, you're just messed up, you're led by the devil, I would still, to some degree, have a little bit of that flexibility to hear what someone has to say and to talk it out with them. So so that was extremely helpful for me, because I was able to learn from him and have that experience. And then I think what really shook me was during my sophomore year, I did a study abroad in Italy where I got real experience with Catholicism, and not the Catholicism that my parents were always telling me was evil. And at that time, I found out that my mom was actually confirmed Catholic. I had no idea the majority of my life, but my dad was so anti-Catholicism that he was just so hardcore about it that I was just told my entire life that they're evil and you should never talk to them. And wow. And
just like the Mormons, right?
If you talk, yes, they're just like the Mormons. They're corrupt. They're led by the devil, and you need to try and convert them if you can. And if you can't, then leave them behind. And
well, what would Kirk Cameron think of that?
Oh man, yeah, my life was filled with like Left Behind and all these wonderful things, like the movie Faith Like Potatoes, things I was forced to watch.
Faith Like Potatoes.
A surprisingly decent movie, but also there are better movies. So getting experience with the Catholic world. And what was interesting is I was attending this little kind of school called Saints Bible Institute, which did a lot of connections to a church that did a lot of converting Catholics to Protestantism. So it was a real experience, but that was also the first time I'd ever had Eucharist with wine, because they insisted on doing it weekly, which I thought was bizarre because the church I went to had communion maybe twice a year. And it was usually connected to some sort of leadership thing. So like I was in a youth leadership thing. We'd have these conferences or youth retreats and stuff, and we would do communion as the leadership team in preparation for leading this rather peppy experience of people yelling, screaming and stuff. I mean, when I say screaming, I mean screaming. and getting to experience that was really incredibly eye-opening. And I went by I went with people from my school, but I didn't know any of them. And so it was a real life-changing moment where I was with a bunch of different people I didn't know in a country I'd never been in, surrounded by people who don't speak my language, and just kind of having that cluster there and just like getting to see the world in a completely different light. And from there, I kind of popped around. I had half a week in Paris, half a week in Barcelona, came back and realized that something was, I was kind of slow to change because I'm not one who wants to just follow the crowd. I don't want to just
Good.
flip flop, be willy-nilly, easy to persuade. And I like to mull over everything that I've heard and that I've seen and really process it out. And so at that point, I went home from that experience, and that's kind of like at that point is when my life changed. I ended up having my dad walked out on us. I actually went to Italy knowing that my dad planned to leave my mom when I got back.
Wow.
And so that was kind of a thing I had to process while I was overseas. And when I got back, he did leave, and he came back, and I kicked him out. Said, "You can't be here. This is not okay." I'm getting messages and texts and all this stuff, and the chaos that you've brought here. I had to restrain my brother last week to keep you two from getting into a fight. You walked out on us. We've had one whole week of absolute peace in this house. You need to go. And he did. He just it's very hard for him as a man to express emotions. And I just remember him starting to cry, apologizing for crying, and then running out the door as quickly as he could, because he didn't want us to see any sign of weakness or vulnerability in him. So, and he spent the rest of the summer away. And when I moved back to college, he moved into my room. So it was just kind of this interesting faith experience where everything I saw within my own family was super chaotic, and everything that they were telling me what Christianity should be and how it should be creating your life to be wasn't happening. Right. And there was a lot of this, thankfully, a lot of this manipulative stuff that really didn't take root, because I kept hearing this stuff my entire life, where this is the way, this is the absolute truth, this is how you need to live. And also, while we're at it, if you can't trust family, you can't trust anyone. Right. But I can't trust my family. So thankfully, I didn't take that to heart. I actually started listening to other people and engaging with the world around me. And I also ended up spending a summer in Amman, Jordan, interning with a Iraqi church. It was a bunch of refugees. It was really interesting. I ended up having no translators because the man who was supposed to be our mentor, like a few weeks before we flew over, was like, "Hey, by the way, I'm actually going to be in the States all summer. Have fun. You can watch my flat." And and so me and this other guy, Michael, were just in this flat, taking care of it, going over to the church, and we had a translator for a week. But that guy's housemate, who was an Iraqi Jordanian native, got kidnapped by the Jordanian secret police because he had converted to Christianity and was living with two Americans, and they were convinced that they were CIA agents. So, so our translator felt like for the protection of the church, he needed to separate himself. So I started teaching English instead. So I got a lot of engagement with people there from the Muslim faith. I got to go and sit down with, I actually went to a sheikh's house. He invited us over for dinner and to have a theological debate. And I went 3 different times, and it was absolutely incredible just getting to sit and talk with what was regarded as a very prominent teacher in the Muslim faith in that area, and just being able to sit and talk with him and to hear the contrast of thoughts and how they thought that we thought and how we thought, they thought this, and it was not true. And there was like all these different perspectives, and it was just so good being able to get in there and just actually hear someone tell their story and their life and what they actually believe, rather than all the, like when I was told as like, oh, they're all terrorists, you know, or that they're all just out to kill Americans. They hate Christians and stuff. But that wasn't my experience. I sat with them, and they, you know, even threw a dinner in our honor just to thank us for spending time and having these conversations. So it was different experiences like that that really just started shaking me out of this world that I had been caught up in. And so then when I graduated with my Christian ministry degree, I
good on you, man.
The best part about those degrees is your options are work in a church or Target, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh,
do you want fries with that?
It's the perfect degree for the aspiring homeless person. But the
goals.
But at that point, I was so shaken up in what I believed, and so much had changed, and I was dealing with so much stuff for the first time.
I got a question. So
yeah,
you had all of these experiences, but you had to pass the exams. Did you bluff on your exams?
Okay. So, well, so my professors came from a variety of different theological backgrounds. Thankfully, I didn't have to bluff very much. Okay. There were definitely several papers where I did not pick up the book until the night before. And
as God intended.
I'll just say that I did quite well. So it was, yeah. But you can't really bluff on Greek and Hebrew because I had to take both of those. And theology class, my professor, Dr. Daryl Charles, he was rough. He was the hardest professor I ever had. He broke a lot of 4.0 averages. There were people who had just perfect GPAs. They were English students, and he was like, nope, your grammar sucks, and just like destroy their papers. So so I had some really hard professors, and those were individuals who really helped me to shape my thoughts and to help me to lean more into where I am now, which is like going toward orthodoxy. So there's a lot of different things that play into this whole conglomerate, but I was in this wild place where I didn't know what I believed anymore. My family was in chaos, and I was actually recognizing that there was a lot of hypocrisy going on there, and I didn't want to have anything to do with it. And I recognized that there was a lot of questions about and a lot of inconsistencies within the theology that I grew up in, and that wasn't for me anymore. And I wanted to figure out what I was going to actually believe. So I ventured out and just started exploring all these different denominations, and eventually landed with Anglicanism. And then that's when I ended up moving out here to Kansas City and working in this crazy ministry setting where I basically didn't have time or energy to go to church. Unless
you worked on Sunday, then you're forced to go, right?
Exactly. So if you worked on Sunday, you were driving a van full of teenagers to church, which is, by the way, a harrowing experience. And
because they're there for mental health issues, and you have 15 of them in your van, and good luck.
Yeah.
Is that like a short bus? Is that the joke?
It was a lot of rich, spoiled white kids was the majority of the demographic kind of thing.
Sounds
so some kids had like actual problems and got help there. But also a lot of the kids were the kind of the fundamentally Christian parents that caught their kids smoking weed once, right? So we had a couple of those, and we also had a good handful of kids that like actually needed to be there, right?
Okay. Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, you had students with depression.
You're jumping ahead though, Steve. I had another question.
Yeah.
What was your aha moment from what you believed? When did you like open up and realize I need to question a lot of these things? Do you remember the point that happened, or was it just a progression?
For me, it was a progression.
Okay.
And it was kind of like when I looked in hindsight, I was like, oh, I was here. I am here now. Okay. And going back to Tiller, I remember having a conversation with Tiller where I just asked him, I'm like, when did I change? And he's like, I'll be honest with you, I have no idea. He's like, I've known you for 4 years. I know that you were a different person when I met you, but I cannot tell you when or like a certain point. If the closest thing to an aha moment would probably be the 3 months I spent in Italy.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a huge shift for me. So.
Okay. And what was it in Italy that made you, was this something that stood out for you? Was it just realizing that the Catholics are not all evil? Is that kind of, that's a huge one.
So I would say there was like several elements that really played into that. Being in a intentional community where I was kind of reliant upon the people that were around me, and I really didn't have a choice. I needed to rely on these people because otherwise I was completely by myself.
Right.
But being able to experience genuine religious community, because I don't believe I really got it up until that point. I got a lot of fluff and show and all these other things that were
woo-woo, right?
Yeah, woo-woo things that I experienced from
circus,
where I grew up. Yeah, and there was expectations of performance and all this stuff. Here I came across people who were much more intentional and genuine, individuals who didn't grow up Christian, and some that had, and they'd come, they were just all here together, and then experiencing this other culture and going around and visiting these cathedrals and experiencing the beauty of the architecture, this glorious, beauteous stuff that I was just like, I was told my entire life was evil. I was told that the cathedrals were evil. They're wasting money. They could be giving it to the poor. They could be doing this and they could be doing that. And I remember one of my professors, our Greek professor, a wonderful human, he was just like, I think there's something to be said about spending money for the loftiness and grandeur of God. And I'm like, okay. And then that's when I started to see the beauty of symbolism and the beauty of these material things that were expressing theology and thought and emotion in a way that I didn't see before. And I saw value and beauty in it that I couldn't see from the outside because I was just stuck in this echo chamber. And so being able to get there and to see all this, I got to go to Rome for a fine arts class. We walked through St. Peter's, and I remember walking in, and there was a pilgrimage of people that were walking in, and they were doing this special ceremony, and that just boggled me because there were these different things I had never seen before. And I remember like gazing down to the nave and seeing this beam of light coming down onto the altar and just being awestruck by everything around me and thinking, I'm okay with this. I am completely okay with this. The gold and the grandeur and like all this stuff. This isn't wasting funds. This is the use of material for the glory and worship of God. And it really pulled me in. And so when I graduated college, I found myself going to Anglicanism because it was kind of a transition point. I wasn't ready to go to Catholicism. I had way too many questions about the papacy and all this other stuff because I'm like, well, I don't think anyone is perfect. And Anglicanism was an introductory for me to the high church scene and being able to participate in Vespers and all this stuff. And yeah, that was kind of the progression there that led me a little bit more east. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, I mean that is very simple. Well, I mean I can't say very simple because I tend to lean more Eastern Orthodox in my tradition as well. Also coming from kind of an evangelical Pentecostal background and stuff like that. And a lot of people go to Anglicanism because they want to be connected with an ancient faith.
Yeah,
and a lot of those types of traditions are still kind of kept. I agree. I think the Catholics have a couple issues. In fact, if you'd caught us a couple weeks ago with our friend Bobby, I wanted to do a fantastic episode on why I'm not Catholic and explain the subtle difference. Not to jab him, but just to show the differences. And I think we could have all done it.
Sure.
Like why I'm not a Protestant, why I'm not an evangelical, why whatever. But it's interesting how many people flock to Anglicanism, and then a lot of them discover Orthodoxy. And
Yeah.
it's yeah. I mean, you've been to the Orthodox Church at all? Have you done the baptism and any of those things?
So I have not gone through the process of confirmation with the Orthodox Church, but when I moved to after I left Shelterwood, or was I allowed to say that? After I left the crazy place, I went to.
We're gonna be sued.
Worth it.
Went to Roanoke, Virginia. Sorry. It slips off the tongue. After I moved to Roanoke, Virginia, I started attending this place called St. Ambrose Orthodox Church. It was a beautiful church with incredible priest Father Sam, who showed me incredible love, incredible compassion, and was willing to teach me anything I wanted to know. And at the time, I was actually really close to another friend from college, Father Miles. He is an Anglican priest. He ended up becoming Anglican, getting ordained. And he was working in a Lutheran church at the time, which is just kind of a interesting thing. And he was like, hey, we have an Orthodox church that meets in our sanctuary on Saturdays. And I'm like, this is getting weird. And so I attended the Orthodox service and experiencing the depth of symbolism and all the stuff and the incense and everything. It was just absolutely incredible. But again, I was in this place where I was taking it slow, and I was just like, I want to take in all the information I can and really grasp the theology here and where you guys are at versus where I'm at, and kind of play around with that. And then there was just various different elements that were affecting me as an individual, because I actually identify as bisexual. And so that becomes kind of an issue. Like, well, how do I feel about that? What does that even look like within Christianity? Because I know what I was told my entire life. And I know I've prayed these things my entire life. Like, hey, God, could you do something about this? Because this is getting fucking stupid. And and that internal wrestling that God wasn't doing anything about, or, like, yeah, nothing was being done. Like, yes. God's like, I don't care, like, whatever. And just being able to move myself into a place where I wanted to understand why I believed what I believed, and like, why do I even care what Paul has to say? Like, who is this guy anyway? Like, why are we putting him on the pedestal? And so that's when I dove into the Orthodox Church and started experiencing the services and all the incredible beauty and the variation of theology there, which was extremely different than what I grew up in. And then hearing Father Sam talk about these different miracles he'd experienced and all these different stories and being in a monastery and all this other stuff, and talking about the difference between Orthodox and Catholic and their view of Mary and the saints and all that stuff. And then kind of getting a broader perspective of a much more mystical experience, which is interesting because a lot of people would think of, I know at least a lot of people in the Pentecostal circle might even look at their own experience as being like a mystical experience, or that they have mystic tendencies. But then when you look at Orthodoxy in terms of mysticism, oh man, and that's when I dove into, and I started reading Brother Lawrence. I've been listening to, exactly. It wrecked me. And then started listening to Richard Rohr and all these different faith influences that I could just kind of glean from and try to develop my own faith, while also beginning to actually accept information from other people, because it's just like all truth is God's truth, right? Period. And it doesn't really matter where it comes from. And then I started taking kind of a Lewis perspective that, like, if you find something good among the pagans, it is not a discredit to Christianity, but a credit to the pagan. And I'm just like, okay,
that's right.
So what I need to do is I need to expand and actually start learning some stuff. So I started listening to Alan Watts and getting a little bit more of his perspective on Eastern philosophy and Buddhism and all this other stuff, and trying to apply some of that information to my own life, because I'm like, this is genuine stuff that's actually proven to be beneficial. Why can't I learn from this And that's why a lot of people hate me, because I am like in this in-between place where they're like, you're not a Christian. I'm like, I am a Christian. I am very much a Christian. Surprise. I just happen to not be stuck in an echo chamber. So, so I am too Christian for atheists. I'm too atheist for Christians. And it's great. It's good being in a in-between spot where I'm like, well, I don't have to believe everything you believe. If I join a church, I don't have to believe everything they believe. Mm-hmm. So I have a little bit of free thought, and I think that actually makes it more valuable than me just falling in hook, line, and sinker. Like, I am actually saying I'm doing the work here. I'm engaging with your text. I'm engaging with a comparison, a control group, and I'm trying to figure out what actually is genuine and what matters here. So that's where I've kind of landed. So, and recently I've been studying more into what paganism looks like. I have a friend who's a Norse pagan, and I'm like, teach me. I want to understand, who are you and what is your story and why did you land here? Because they went from Christianity to being Norse pagan. I'm like, that's a transition that I really want to hear about. Tell me more. So,
oh yeah. I don't know if you saw Brooke's necklace, but
oh, I did.
It's Thor's hammer.
It was the first thing I saw. I have the runes of Odin. So,
oh, brilliant.
Yeah.
I was actually called an Odinist the other day when I was out here. It's like, are you an Odinist? It's like, I didn't even know this was such a thing.
That's a new word I need to say more often.
It's like, yeah, I'm putting it in all my tags on Instagram now. I'm an Odinist.
You know, he's the reason for season, right?
Stephen, your story is spot on, my friend. And it echoes exactly with what I've been saying. That the work of Christ is universal. That, I mean, the craziest theology that I had a discussion with somebody about was that God has actually redeemed even the old gods and the pagan rituals. Yeah. And he's brought, his truth has now been inserted into every legend. Now, obviously you can't teach that. That's high philosophy and whatever, right? But to a certain degree, I actually agree with that. I think that's very possible. In fact, I think there's Psalms 82 where he talks about walking amongst the gods, and he says, you're blind and dumb and useless. I'm going to cast you to the earth and you will die like mortal men, and then you will rise up and see. So I believe that the old gods, whatever they were, the Ra and Odin and all these guys, some kind of archetype of those have fallen to the earth. I believe they might actually be archetypes in men that we could kind of tap into as part of the divine revelation. And the God types experience the humility of humanity, you know, through us. So that's crazy theology. That's something I would never discuss publicly. Nobody will ever hear me say those things. But yeah, I absolutely love your story. And it's very ironic that, it's similar to you. I've landed very close to the I don't agree with everything in Orthodoxy.
Sure.
But the theosis, the idea that the salvation is in this life, that God became man that man might become God, that we, not just to experience our fullness of life, but actually tap into the nature of the divine and grow into that. Yeah. That's the biggest reason why I'm not Catholic.
That is oh my goodness. Theosis is a huge theological argument that I wrestled with for a long time. Yeah. And then it took me listening to Richard Rohr talking about panentheism that really helped me connect the dots there and be like, okay, I can see this and understand this and understanding what it really means to be God breathed or to have the image of God, and like what that means to become more and more like Christ and stuff. And so like the mysticism there, but just fully pulled me in and, really laid the groundwork for me to become who I am now. So, and the talking about like the old gods and stuff. I mean, the Bible is full of things where it talks about the council of heaven and all this stuff, where it's making it very clear there are other things going on. And when you have like these crazy weird encounters with the prophets talking about like, oh, this angel's like, oh, I was just over here fighting this guy. Sorry, I'm late. And so, and I know there's a lot of different questions and stuff concerning the, what that actually means, but
welcome, Skull.
Thor. Yeah, Thor's a great guy. He's He does
He
a lot
is
of like
awesome.
he does a lot of fitness stuff on his channel, and he does a lot of personal training.
He was
But dude,
bench pressing some chick the other day. It was
yeah.
pretty
He's
cool.
he's literally the closest you can get to like an actual Thor in real life.
Probably. I want to be
Yeah,
like him
he
when I
lives
grow
the
up.
Viking lifestyle. Mad respect to Thor. I'm glad he's in watching.
That reminds me, I've been wanting to get a battle axe.
Oh yeah,
I'm in the
Yeah.
UK. It's illegal. I can't.
Is it really?
Yeah.
Oh,
Steven, I know
unless
you
it's
have-
shaved
oh.
off. Yeah,
Yeah.
Go ahead, Corey.
I was gonna say you also have that giant badass longsword, don't you?
oh,
You have it near
yeah. I do. I also have like bow and arrow. Hold on.
you. It's worth it. We need the weapons.
This guy is great, Corey. I'm glad you brought him on. That is a phenomenal story, and
Oh yeah.
yeah, I'm glad people get to hear that. It's definitely going to get us in trouble.
Yeah, it's a replica of a 12th century Templar Knight
it's
Crusader sword.
Excalibur.
It's a little burnt. I did a photo shoot where I set it on fire and had Ben carrying it, playing a bit of the barbarian. So yeah,
Oh, yeah.
it's yeah, I love this thing. It's
Oh, yeah.
it's a bit hefty and fun to swing. I just need to polish it up because, like I said, fire.
Yeah, apparently it does that to things.
Yeah, fire does scar some stuff.
Yeah, I was going to talk more about the whole looking at other traditions that are even outside the Christian spectrum. Like we were just talking about Norse mythology and old gods and paganism. Recently, for my work, actually, we've been studying really hard on Buddhism and Hinduism, and specifically their meditation and breathing practices. And I've actually been using that in my work. Excuse me. I've been using that in my work to help teach people with addiction issues, right? And I've been seeing more and more now that like how much like your breath and your breathing techniques and that type of meditation and stillness is like super, super useful for not just your own spiritual well-being, but like your physical well-being as well, right?
Yes.
And so that's something I've been going through recently is realizing like, you know, Christianity is cool and all, but it doesn't actually like, especially modern Christianity in the Western civilization does not have all the answers, right?
Yeah.
If anything,
Stone
they have,
the unbeliever.
yeah, they might have one or two things I'd give them credit for, and the rest they just shun, right?
Yeah.
It's not Christian enough, right? Christianity is going to church on Sunday, wearing a tie, and having a potluck, right? That's
Don't forget
Christianity.
bingo night. You must have a bingo night
Absolutely.
for
Yeah.
the old biddies.
You need a bunch of kids on Wednesday night to play Chubby Bunny and watch, you know, Left Behind, right? That's Christianity, right?
Or you're gonna watch Braveheart. So or like scenes from it.
Oh yeah. Nobody's got 4 hours. Come on.
That's why you only do scenes from it.
Yeah. But I know,
Yeah,
Stephen, you've gotten into the meditation aspect as well, right? I don't know if you
Yeah.
wanted to talk more about that, of where that came from and how it's helping or hurting or anything.
Yeah, so I started learning a little bit more about meditation as a Christian practice when I was in Italy, and then even more so when I was in the Middle East, because that was a little bit more of an acceptable practice. And I started experiencing the consistency of the Muslim faith and how they engaged and how they did the prayers multiple times a day. I mean, like that stuff was just like screaming every single night, Allah Akbar, and like all this stuff just like going all over the place. And it's just like, what is this, and why are they doing it, and what does that mean? And when I started looking a little bit more into trying to figure out what Buddhism was and trying to explore these other faiths, I began to experience meditation as a practice that was very different from what I had been raised to believe. And then when I became a part of the Anglican Church, my priest was actually very adamant, like, oh yeah, there is meditation and there is a way of doing it that is extremely beneficial. And I learned it from reading a book as well from a former Zen Buddhist turned Christian. I'm trying to remember the name of it. It was 3 Views of Everything. It was kind of a reverse of taking worldview and saying there are only 3 different types of worldview. You have monism, dualism, and Trinitarianism. And then also let's talk about what meditation is and all this stuff. So when I was reading through that and started exploring that, I started implementing it into my own life. And what I found from that was that it was extremely beneficial to helping with my anxiety. It was very beneficial with helping with some of my depression issues and things like that. And so there was a very practical use for meditation, which told me that this was kind of built into who we are. This is very clearly, this isn't just some demonic pagan thing. This is a real life practice that was integrated into our psychology. And I would say that was through God. God intended for us to have certain moments of relaxation and thoughtfulness and breathing, and like intended for our bodies to function a certain way. And this was a way for me to really tap into that. And with that came a lot of implementation of divine prayers and stuff, using the prayer book of the Book of Common Prayer, or using some more Orthodox prayer books and things like that. I also used Phyllis Tickle's books. There were a bunch of different prayers for the seasons, called the Divine Hours. Really great series for people who are like wanting to start out and kind of understand structured prayer and how that works. But when I began to learn about how Peter was doing the hours, he was doing the offices of prayer on the rooftop when he had his vision. He wasn't just randomly up there praying, and he probably wasn't speaking in tongues. He was doing what was a liturgical practice, which was a common thing in the early church. And it was something that really caught my attention because it was the opposite of everything I had heard, and I wanted to understand more. And that's how I started working with that. So I have an altar set up back here behind me. I have an incense holder. I have multiple candles. I have a little icon of Jesus and Mary next to each other that the Orthodox priest, Father Sam, gave me.
Awesome.
And it's been a beautiful experience. And even like moving into talking about saint veneration and realizing that it's not the same thing. It's like when we're talking about this perspective of spirituality where there's a greater experience than just the physical world. And it starts to sound a little hokey, but it's really interesting how we have a consistency in human civilization for spirituality. And there is kind of an understanding that there are other beings, and Christianity and Judaism kind of steps in and says, those aren't our rulers. Those are actually subjected to God just as we are. And in the Bible, when it talks about the part where it's like a little lower than the angels, mm-hmm. The literal translation is, you have set us just above the angels. It got retranslated by a scribe who was like, oh, that's too prideful. There's a mistake here. We need to lower it. And so like trying to force humility in a way, like we are put on par with the angels and other spiritual beings. And so like recognizing that and recognizing kind of that Celtic history of there might be spirits. I don't know. I don't care. They are just as subjected to God as I am, and maybe even a little bit more. And so what do I have to worry about them? What do I have to fear about them? In fact, why would I I can, speak against evil, and I can say prayers of warding and prayers of exorcism, but who am I to say like, you know what? I'm going to take all the help I can get. I'm going to start asking for some of these saints who are a part of this great crowd of witnesses hey, you should just petition on my behalf because my God, I'm struggling. So, and going back to what we were saying is like that Christianity makes room for all these things, that all things are taken in under Christ. There is, in a sense, that same yearning, because I think like it's an internal thing. We long for connection to the spiritual and the divine. We want these individuals, and Christianity says, hey, why do you need polytheism? You have the saints, you have all these that you can ask to pray on your behalf, and you are equal with them. You are a part of one eternal kingdom, and you want a goddess? Well, I got a mother here for you that is going to watch out for you, take care of you, And also, I'm God and I'm in charge and everything's going to be fine. So, so like as I explore that and explore the benefits of Buddhism and how Hinduism in and of itself is not a direct contradiction to Christianity, because I think that what Hinduism is touching on is that Hinduism is actually a monotheistic religion, because when you talk about the polytheism of Hinduism, you're actually talking about the multiple avatars of the divine being.
Yes.
And it's this expression of the divine being. They're really monotheistic, which is a mind-blowing concept when you realize that, because it changes the way that you see their world and the way that they see the world. And they would lean into pantheism, and I'm saying, well, this is actually really close. Let's go over here and just kind of, I really like this over here and I like that over there. And there's just, it's beautiful. It's just absolutely beautiful. I think
I was going to say, it kind of reminds me of Apostle Paul, I think in Acts, where he's talking about the unknown God to the Greeks, right?
Yes.
They had a statue of an unknown God that we might believe in, right? Do you disagree, Stephen?
I know a lot of people argue that was that individuals recognizing that all of the Greek gods were false and that there was this, one unknown God. A lot of people make that argument. I think that here's what I believe. I believe that Christianity is most true, but I don't believe it is all truth. I don't think it is a full culmination of all truth. I think there's a lot of things we don't know or don't understand. And I think we provide an answer, as Paul talked about, as to here's your unknown God. It's a lot bigger than what you would say and what you would believe. And God is in charge of your other gods. I don't think it necessarily means we have to throw all other things out the window and say like, oh, this is just all gobbledygook.
Yeah.
Though Greek pantheism is a little bit more of a
it's messed up.
Interesting. Greek pantheism, I'm just like,
That's a tough one to reconcile.
Well, yeah, usually I like that example, not necessarily as, because Paul's trying to convert them and tell them they're wrong, right? Sure. But to me, I see Apostle Paul's really good at like improvising, right? Where he's able to take other people's beliefs and religions in addition to what his beliefs are and find a good way to like meld them, right? Yeah. He's really good at thinking outside the box and getting more creative and realizing, hey, we actually do have a lot in common, right? To the Jews who became a Jew, to the Gentiles who became a Gentile, became all things to all men, so that you may save some, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that's an important part too, especially when we're talking about Buddhism and Hinduism and paganism and things like that. It's very interesting that we can connect the dots and see how they are actually similar, right? And I think that's something also that Paul did in his ministry as well, is learning to connect the dots between the different faiths instead of, I hate all of you, you're all going to hell because you don't believe exactly what I believe. Right?
I mean, he had an entire argument with Peter, like, hey, stop trying to make them Jewish. Like, cut it out. So,
exactly.
I mean, Stephen, on some of the finer points then, I mean, the sticking points for a lot of more traditional Christians are things like hell, the prospect of hell. I mean,
we could have a conversation on that one.
I'm sure we would.
Our resident
Tom is there we go.
Resident Tom is like our resident, very fun, interesting, extremist Catholic, but also is very changing all the time. He has a very what would you call it, kaleidoscope background, kind of similar to the three of us, where he's been to a lot of different denomination stuff, and right now he actually is practicing Catholic. But yeah, he was asking us, what about the urgency of the salvation message in regards to others going to hell? What do you think, Stephen? Like, is it urgent?
I do not think it's urgent. Here's the thing I think about the gospel being the good news. I believe that the good news is always good news, no matter what. And it's good news whether you understand everything. It's good news whether you have a really like put together lifestyle or not, because it's so much nuance there. There's so much going on, and I believe that we should preach good news. I think that there is some really incredible benefit to people knowing Christ. I want them to know Christ. But in the end, the Bible makes it clear, every knee bows, every tongue confesses, period. And I think that's kind of the leaning more into orthodoxy and a little bit of a C.S. Lewison type perspective is like, you look upon Christ and either you approach him or you turn into the shadows and walk away. Hell is locked from the inside. That's kind of my perspective on it. And why do we believe that all these choices have to be made here and now? What is to say that we will not stand before the throne of God in the end, after we've passed on from this life, and him say, hey, by the way, look, I'm real. I'm like, oh shit. Well, I'm sorry. I think that there is a greater benefit to coming to faith in this life. And I think it has an impact on this world because earth is our ultimate destination. The end is not us going to heaven. The end is all things are made new. This is the new earth, the new creation, everything being brought to perfection. It's a return to a state of Eden. And that is where we're headed towards. I don't necessarily think that hell is anything more than kind of a concept of purgatory. Like if you're facing the full love and fire of God, because I believe hell and heaven are in the same place. I believe they're exactly the same thing.
Corey, where have you heard that before?
Oh boy. Who knows?
Either you're facing the fire of God, the love of the fire of God, with full embrace and acceptance and moving towards God, or you're experiencing without God and in that presence in complete contradiction to him, and it's going to suck. It is awful. And I believe that that's what it is. And at some point, I believe that eventually everyone reaches that state of mind where they're saying, okay, the love wins. I think Rob Bell could have communicated all that a little bit better than he did, but whatever, it's fine.
I mean, just on that note, why I'm kind of, we say kind of poking at Corey. We did an episode on hell, right? We did. My friend AMOS. There was a day I was traveling, and he kind of threw me under the bus as this hopeful universalist. And I was like, oh my God, we're gonna have this conversation. And in that conversation, I said exactly what you just said, which is the Orthodox view of hell is the return. All of us return to God. For those that love Him, it's bliss and the fullness of joy. For those who hate him, it could be like a tormenting fire. And the nuance is we don't actually know how long that lasts.
Yeah.
So to hear you repeat that back to me, I'm just having, I could turn this off. You guys could just have a chat.
The word eternity doesn't mean forever. It means a set amount of time.
Yes,
it's an appointed time.
Aeon, yes.
And I think when we talk about in the New Testament, Christ didn't speak of Sheol to anybody but the religious leaders.
That's right.
He said it only to the Pharisees and the Sadducees. He's like, hey, be wary of the fire. And I don't think there's any reason for us to believe that it's this ongoing eternal condemnation, because I don't think that's consistent with God's character. I don't think that's consistent with Christ's character or what he taught. And on top of that, it's like, how do I say this? I got caught up in my words. Sorry. I just stumbled over them. But yeah, there's just absolutely, it appears to me from where I stand that the theology of hell developed to where it is now as kind of a manipulative piece for control and fear tactics and to push people towards conversion. When the early church was insistent on conversion being a much longer process than just like run up here right now to the altar and make a confession. It wasn't as strongly numbers based as what we currently have in American Christianity, where it's like, well, we had 500,000 people say the Lord's Prayer this week to come and be saved and stuff. And it's like there's really poor, shallow theology behind everything you just said. And it's really just a lot of arrogant, like showcasing, like, hey, this, like, look what I've done for the glory of the kingdom of God, which in the end will be worth diddly shit. Like when you stand before the throne of God, I don't think he's going to care about that. Yeah. Right. He's not going to care how many people I got to say the sinner's prayer. He's going to say, hey, how did you treat other humans? Did you help the widow and the orphan? Did you do anything to try and protect them? I gave you these gifts. What did you do with those? Like, let's talk. And as one of my students from the place where we worked, I was sitting with him recently, just having a conversation. He's like, I feel like when I get to heaven, God's going to say, like, hey, here's a cup of coffee. Let's kind of talk about what happened. So
how was it? Did you enjoy did you enjoy the trip down to earth? Was it good? I'm completely on board with this. This is fantastic. I have nothing to do.
Yeah, I think something interesting about the whole hellfire and brimstone and the urgency of hell. To me, it reminds me a lot of, and this is on my mind because I'm slowly trying to unplug my family from mainstream media influences because every one of their talks is, did you see the news today? Did you see the news today? Did you see the news today? And I'm trying to talk to him about if it bleeds, it leads kind of thinking. And I think, hellfire and brimstone is kind of, if it bleeds, it leads, right? At the end of the day, if you can make it more extreme and dire, you're more able to get people to listen. Mm-hmm. And not to say, a while ago we had indulgence and stuff. It was also a good money-making opportunity, right? It's
good for business, yeah.
Yeah. If you can get people worried about other people's eternal salvation, and for the low price of $10, you can help them, right? To the church. Yeah. And so I don't know. I'm seeing a lot of parallels between those two, in my opinion. So I don't know about you guys, but it kind of feels the same.
Yeah, and that's like, and we're talking about sin nature now. We're talking about us like we are corrupt. I think so. I mean, like that's what we're talking about. It's like how we are corruptible and how that actually flows into everything else we do. Like that's why we have hundreds of denominations for Christianity. Correct. Because we have our problems. We have our sin nature. The Southern Baptist Convention only exists because there were a bunch of missionaries who wanted to be able to own slaves. I believe that right now, the Southern Baptist Convention should not exist. Slavery is illegal. You need to shut this down. Like reintegrate in with everyone else. But no one wants to give up their power. That's greed. That is like, it's insanity. When you have something that's based off of something ridiculous like that, just why are we doing this? And then even with some of the split between Orthodoxy and Catholicism was over some things. It was like, okay, well, why are we arguing some of this stuff? In fact, just recently, there were talks with the Coptic Church coming back into the fold of Orthodoxy because they had split over a misunderstanding of language. They didn't understand, like there was a miscommunication way back when, and they've been separated all this time when in a lot of ways they were saying the same thing. And it's like, why are we arguing? Why is Russia and the Greek church like currently fighting? Like because we're human, because we're not infallible, we're not perfect, and we're not. And I don't think Paul's perfect. I'm going to throw that out there. I don't think his writings are perfect. I think he's a little bit of a prick. But I know that a lot of people like praise him, and they're like, oh, I mean, people will put Paul above the Holy Spirit and God all the time. Like, oh, but Paul said this. Why do I care? Jesus said that. And so I don't think that these things are perfect because they're affected by us. And with that comes indulgences and comes these manipulative tactics to try and, catch people. And I'd say that some people genuinely have good intentions. They're like, hey, I have an absolute need to get these people saved. Like this has to happen. I have to do it. How can I do it? Well, Paul says the gospel preached in any way is still the gospel. Let's do what we have to get these people converted as quickly as possible. Yes, no inerrancy, Tom. I do not believe in inerrancy.
Yeah, I think we take the position that the scriptures are inspired, but it doesn't mean they're not inerrant. And especially if you know the history of the scriptures and the translations and stuff like that. Yeah, there are things in the Bible that really probably shouldn't be there. There's politics, there's all sorts of things, but we're not going to start pulling it apart at this point. So
yeah, I think there is some kind of cognitive dissonance with American Christianity and the Bible, because I feel like everybody kind of knows that, the whole Council of Nicaea, it was actually all compiled, 300 plus years after it was written. But then we still say it's like this wholly valid symbol of inerrancy and authority and all that kind of stuff. Even though we all know it's a bunch of different authors writing a bunch of different books and letters to different people, right? Yeah. But we kind of like to say, but all of it together is one superhero thing, right? It's kind of like the difference between Bruce Banner and the Hulk. Like, we know the Bruce Banner origin story, but right now it's Hulk, right? I don't know if that's a good analogy or not, but I'm running with it.
I mean, it's the Eastern Orthodox proverb says, the Bible didn't give us the church gave us the Bible. In other words, the church pre-existed the scriptures for 300 years, as you rightly said. We did not have a complete canon. But now that we've switched, and a large part of that is the Protestant Reformation, which, I mean, has two sides to it. There's good and bad in everything in that respect. But yeah, it's now Father, Son, and Holy Bible. That's kind of the Western view of Trinitarian, their Trinitarian theology. And even Jesus himself says it. He says, search the scriptures, for in them you think you have life. And he's basically saying there's no life in the scriptures, but it speaks of me. So, and he never referred to it as the word. He always referred to it as the scriptures. The only time he ever used the word is if the scriptures quoted something God actually said. So we could actually do a whole thing on the word of God versus the scriptures and how it's used and stuff like that.
Yeah.
The church just bundles it all together and be like, it's all inspired. It's all God,
Yeah, and an even deeper dive, that's just the New Testament. A lot of people think the Old Testament was written at the same time by the same people, right?
Good stuff,
there's a lot there.
Good stuff. Stephen, man, you're awesome, man. You remind me of a good friend of mine off in Northern Ireland. His name's Michael. I wouldn't give too much away. He's also a redhead, ginger guy. He's pretty cool, pretty awesome as well.
How many souls has he taken?
Essentially the same person, because
pretty
we're
much.
soulless. When you don't have a soul, you just.
Yeah. Maybe at some point I might link the two of you guys up. You might have some interesting conversations.
That'd be fun.
Yeah, definitely. Are we opening up for questions there, Corey? What's going on?
Yeah, I've just posted it now.
Fantastic. So Stephen, just basically, you are a preterist, you're a hopeful universalist, or are you like a flat out universalist?
So yes, I am a preterist. Everything is, I think everything is happening except for Christ's return, which I'm kind of like, well, that might not be a literal thing.
He might be
we'll
here,
see.
He may not be here. Yeah,
we'll see. I don't know.
You can't disappoint Kirk Cameron like that. Come on.
The way I see it, it doesn't really impact the way I live now, anyway. But
that was exactly my words. Is like whether Jesus is coming back or not, or if there is a heaven and hell. Like that's. We're in the church age. We're supposed to be doing church stuff. We'll worry about that when we get there, right? I'm not going to change my life that much if I officially know one way or the other. So, yeah.
And I am at the very least an inclusivist with, I don't know, I would say that I would lean universalist, that eventually someone, like, you're not going to sit there forever. Yeah. You might be there for a long time, but what is time anyway when it comes to, like, not being here? So, yeah, I would say that I'm a universalist with openness to more nihilistic perspectives. But so I would say that that's where I land.
Awesome. Well, we have our first questionnaire. Heather, how you going? How's it going, Heather?
What's going on, Heather?
Heather the robot. Yeah.
I am not a bot.
Yeah, likely story. That's what I'm saying.
Look at the bags under my eyes. I am not a bot.
That's very synthetic, I can tell.
So it seems everybody's in this moving process. Yeah. I'll be boxing and doing stuff for another few weeks. I look forward to calling in from my new kitchen.
Good times.
Nice.
So one of the things that stuck with me when I wasn't being interrupted by Facebook Marketplace pickup sales happening while I'm trying to listen to the broadcast was the visceral feeling that Stephen shared about when his father would come home and the energy changing. And there's a lot tied in with the religious aspect to that from my experience, in the fact that there was no room for change, no room for understanding, no adjustment at all. And when a question was asked, you were rebuked or told that, no, that can't be. Like when I said, why can't there be a scientific reason for why the flood happened, or why the earth, how the earth was made, or anything like that? And it's like, no, the Bible doesn't say it, so it's not so. And it's like, and that was very distracting. And it's like, I've come to the point where I feel like I trust people more who aren't so adamant about being right.
Yeah.
And there was a program I was listening to yesterday in passing that, it had nothing to do with this, but one of the things is, do you want to be right or do you want to be happy? And to be honest, all those people who claimed to be right, they never seemed happy. They seemed toxic and miserable, and they were just unable to untether themselves from that. And it took a long time for me to pull back from that too. And I still practice things to try and improve. I work on myself daily, but it just really stuck with me, that share about, when the father came home, because, the energy in the house can change when a parent is angry. And then the child does not have the opportunity to learn. And when you quell a child's ability to learn and be curious, it forces them into that tight wedge of then turning into, I'm right, I have the might, nothing else matters. So I really appreciated that. I really connected with that, and just wanted to say hi and remind Conk that I'm not a bot. And the next time I call in, I'll do it with cobwebs in my hair, which is the way I look most of the time. Trying to get this stuff together. Anyway, thanks so much for letting me on, and have a great Sunday, everybody.
You too, Heather.
You as well.
Yep.
I mean,
Awesome.
that's a very good point about the ability to ask questions in religious homes. And is that part of the reason you're doing psychology and counseling now then, Stephen? Would you say that's kind of a fruit of what you've been through?
Yeah, it's when I left the crazy place, I was wrestling with so much stuff that had been brought up from working there for 3 years. It was high stress, and I recognized that there was a lot of stuff going on internally. I had poured myself out to the point where I was derailing, and I've always cared about people a lot, and I've wanted to be the best I could for helping people. That's why I did a Christian ministry degree. That's why I went to the asylum, and to be helpful to others. And then I recognized that there was so much about myself that I needed to understand, and I needed to question. So I launched myself into psychology to find a way to better understand other people and to better understand myself, and to ask those questions, and to figure out how to navigate a lot of these struggles that I was experiencing from my childhood, from these things that just weren't going away on their own. And I wanted to do the work there. And so it has been beneficial. It's been like every single class so far. And this is why one of those small things that feel very providential, where it's like, you know what, I definitely can't go, I definitely can't go to atheism, because there's after a certain amount of coincidence, you got to stop calling it coincidence. And so it's been a really fantastic journey. And that's part of it, was just understanding myself and being able to question my own emotions and my own autonomy, and what it was that I was brought up in. Because, I wasn't allowed to ask questions. I mean, I could ask questions, but I was not allowed to question them,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think Heather brought up something. Also, Tom's in the waiting room. Tom, I'm going to bring you in like 10 seconds. But I think it's something interesting she pointed out, and I also have to use my favorite pet word of juxtaposition. I haven't got to say it in a while, so. But like juxtaposing, Stephen, you in your room closing the door when your dad was around, right, was a physical buffer with them shutting down all of your questions and saying, because the Bible said so, because I said so. Those are both buffers, right?
Yeah.
It's you not wanting to engage with your dad at the moment, high school you. Eventually, that did come to fruition, right, when you got much older, which is probably a lot better, right? You probably are a lot better to handle it as, adult Stephen versus high school Stephen, right? But I think they were doing the same thing too when they were like, saying no or rejecting any of your questions, and just saying the Bible says that, I say that, they're both the same thing. Yeah. They're both closing the door on something, right? Because they don't want to engage with it, right?
To a degree, I would agree with that. And I'll say this before you pull Tom in. There was a kind of a mindset there where they were always right no matter what, and they were going to shut me down. And it wasn't just with spirituality. I mean, I remember having conversations where I would just, whatever my dad accused me of, I just learned to say, yes, you're right, because if I disagree with him, the punishment was going to be more severe than me refuting. So he could accuse me of lying, and I would say, I didn't lie. Well, you're lying more, so you're going to get more swats with the switch. So different stuff like that. And I remember as a 14-year-old, I was 14 years old, bent over the chair in front of the garage to my dad's shop in front of a highway being whacked with a belt because of that very reason. He was insistent that he was right, I was wrong, and because I pushed back, the punishment increased because I was the one that was lying and not him. Yeah. So there was just no room to hear anything like that. They didn't allow that, I don't know, loss of power or loss of rightness.
Yeah.
It's a narcissistic perspective.
Yeah. So, it's a very self-preservation, right?
Yeah. I would say
at
that
the expense of others.
In what you're saying, there is a element of self-preservation there that was very real. Absolutely. But one was assaulting and one was more defensive. And I would say my move was more defensive and to go against their assaulting ways of self-preservation. So
yeah, for sure. All righty. Let's throw Tom up. Tom, how's it going, man?
What's up, guys?
Hi.
Hey, Steven, great stuff. I'm gonna go back and listen from the beginning.
It gets spicy, bro. Be careful.
Okay. I'll try not to be too offended, but I feel like the attitude, because I saw you did ministry of Conk, and we all came out of ministry. I feel like the attitude is at this point we'd rather be happy than be right. At this point, I think we've tried to be right a lot. We've done a lot of ministry, all the people in this panel, and it's like very painful a lot of times. It's like, isn't the point that we did this was to be happy, so let's just skip the, coloring in the lines part and let's go to the be happy part.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the phrase, so this is how I would put it is, have you ever heard the phrase ignorance is bliss? Right? The flip side of that is like truth is suffering, right? Yeah. And I think that's where you're getting the the dichotomy and the distinction between, do you want to be right or happy? You know what I mean? But I think also in the context of what we're talking about here with Stephen and everything was people who claim truth, even though it's probably not, and they're still unhappy, right? So they kind of got the short end of both sticks at that point, right?
Double whammy, yes.
Yeah. I would say that the two are not contradictory. Being right and happy doesn't have to be combated against each other. I'm trying to be both. So like forever, I thought I was in the right, and I willingly suffered because I thought I was doing what was right. Mm-hmm. But then I discovered that I wasn't right, and there was actually room for happiness in the midst of all that. It wasn't having to be all suffering and all pain. There was an element of like, hey, maybe God loves me as much as he loves everyone I'm trying to care for, and I'm like pouring myself out for. And so kind of combining the reality that I need to love myself as much as I love everybody else, loving thy neighbor as myself. If I loved everyone else the way I love myself, everyone would hate me because I would be the meanest, most horrible person to everybody. And so I think like for me, like trying to my pursuit of being right is in a lot of ways my pursuit of being happy. So I don't really necessarily see them as a contradiction.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I think.
I would
go
kind
ahead.
I was just going to say, I would also say it's about being authentic. It's not necessarily just about being happy, right? I mean, yes, I don't have all the answers to all of the theological questions. I have more questions than I have answers, and I'm fine with that. But at the same time, I believe one of the reasons I've been sent to this earth, apart from discovering who God is to discover who he made me to be. And part of that just means living. I got to figure out the limits of who he's made me. And that includes the good and the bad. The good experiences are great and happiness is great, but that doesn't mean I don't have moments of suffering and regret. And even that's valuable because it shows me his resolve and he can reveal himself as healer and restorer. So sometimes it's not just about happiness. Sometimes it's about being the truest version of yourself, like just being honest with yourself. So I don't know if that balances it out for you.
Yeah. Go ahead, Tom. I'll talk after.
Okay. I don't know. I don't know. You go, Corey. You go.
Okay. So how I kind of see this is more recently my theology has been a very mix of Christianity and Buddhism and Nietzsche, actually. I think they're all hitting around the same spots, right? And so my brain plays a lot of connect the dots between the three. And a lot of it has to do with detachment. I think to be both fully true and happy, there's got to be a sense of detachment to the system and the powers that be. And so how Nietzsche explains it is, he talks about the Ubermensch, but there's also another philosophy he has that doesn't get talked around as much, called the metamorphes of the spirit, right? And he says, like, as you're coming to maturity and coming to your own and like really deep diving into this stuff, you kind of have three phases. The first phase is the camel, is what he calls it, but it's where you're the yes man and the beast of burden, where you're just trying to take on all of the responsibilities. Like, yes, I'll help, I'll do that, I'll sacrifice myself for the greater good, right? He says everybody usually starts there as like the servant camel that just carries stuff for everybody through a desert for their own suffering, right? And he says eventually you evolve into a lion where you're able to start saying no to stuff, right? And it's kind of that age of questioning and rebellion and realizing the camel life sucks ass, right? And he goes, a lot of people either get stuck 1 and 2 in phase 1 or phase 2, like, the whole punk rock, anarchist rebel scene, that's a very lion-based life. And then obviously like the good Christian mom that makes biscuits and gravy and makes kids memorize their Bible verses and does all of the tests for everyone. It's kind of the more camel, or, the men that always have to stack chairs. That's a favorite, it's a favorite example from us, but those are kind of the camel life, right? And his third life is actually the child, and the child is actually the maximum result, where you're able to untether from yes and no of what's given to you, and you're able to create something on your own and re-explore from your own sensibilities and your own understanding of yourself in the world now. So, like, whether you're saying yes sir or no sir, right, or yes sir and no fuck you and fuck all this, right, both of those are still tethered and connected to the system, however you want to put it, right? And so when you become a child, you're actually separating from that, and you'll be able to build and understand and relate to your world on a whole new level, like as a kid again, relearning for the first time. And so I think a lot of people get stuck in 1 or 2, and that's why they're both seeking truth, but very miserably, right? Yeah. Or even the yes man, you could say, doesn't care about truth. He just wants to be the cross bearer for everybody. And so I think a lot of us can relate to those 3 phases. And once you get to that third level, like, you both understand way more, and you're also a lot happier because you're like, screw it, right? So I don't know if you guys can relate to that at all, but I think that's something useful to me. And the Buddhism comes in because, a lot of Buddhism is about detachment, right? Yeah. As well, is being able to, I really heard a really interesting quote where, like, meditation isn't like trying to make yourself better. It's more of removing stuff to get back to just being yourself, right? You're trying to relearn to be yourself instead of trying to add on all these practices to try to make you better, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a major philosophy in the Eastern Orthodox Church is that we're not adding anything to us. So we Christ is already in us. We have all of him. So it's not about scaling levels and adding more doctrine. It's actually about going inside to connect with that's already there, the seed in us already. So that's kind of the philosophy of it. And as the seed grows, bits fall off, things break off, this, that, and the other. And that could be a painful process. But it's growth, it's life. And you don't stay the small, helpless seed forever. Eventually, you do grow into something that's substantial.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm trying to think. I try to phone in every time you guys open it up. And
I love it, man. You're always welcome.
Yeah,
thank
it's awesome.
you. Thank you. I'm trying to pinpoint what I want to say. So like, I guess I'll talk about from my perspective. I've grown up Southern Baptist, and just going from that to Pentecostal was like, huge. That was massive. And now I am like Catholic, which is also massive. And then another jump to Red Pill, and I'm like, I'm spinning plates now.
Awesome.
Which is, well, thank you, but it's kind of like, it's good for me, but I don't think I could ever be part of like a koinonia or an ecclesia, and let that be like in the light like that. So that works for me here, and maybe that works for like my Red Pill brothers that are like across the interwebs. But if I ever want to like reintegrate with a koinonia or an ecclesia, I couldn't be open about that. And to me, that seems problematic.
Well, that's not your fault.
I mean, they have to worry that I'm going to try to bang their daughter.
Well, they worry about that anyway if they've got a daughter. But
right.
I mean, the point I was making with that is that's a reflection on the ecclesia, their judgmental approach to your lifestyle, which again is the great hypocrisy of the Western church, right? So you walk into the church drunk, and as long as you're an unbeliever, there's grace and love and acceptance for you. But the minute you say a prayer, oh no, you can't come to the church drunk anymore. You got to follow all these rules. That's a condemnation on the people being judgmental, not on you.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. So maybe that might be a little nuance. I mean, if you are screwing their daughter, be careful. But yeah, that's not. If that's what you want, bro, you ask God for it, and He will send people of like mind to connect with you. And there are a lot of Christians out there who are more liberated sexually and stuff like that, and they have a fantastic relationship with the Lord. I mean, Stephen here was just talking about his bisexuality. It's a conversation we didn't even get into. But I mean, he's found acceptance here. I'm pretty sure. Stephen, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but
It's been a big mix, but I have found some acceptance. And what's crazy about that is there's a lot, and I understand where you're coming from. Being authentic and open about who you are as a whole can be, first of all, terrifying because it's a lot of vulnerability. But then second of all, you have the way that people react and respond and make assumptions about you are wild. And one of the things that kept me from being as honest about it earlier in my life was the environment I grew up in, where I knew all the assumptions that people were going to make. Immediately, every move, every action I took was going to be questioned. Every motive I have was going to be questioned. And I came to the point where I realized where that wasn't a good enough reason for me not to live as myself. Like, I'm not their thought police. I can't prevent people from making assumptions. Like, they think that, they think I'm also all these other sexually perverted things when I'm not. I'm just me. I'm the same person I've always been, and I've never done anything like that in my entire life. But they're going to assume that, and that's not on me. And I'm not going to let their ignorance get in the way of me living out authentic life. Because if I keep that to myself, sure, in some ways, I could be avoiding a lot of problems and a lot of complications and a lot of conversations that I don't want to have and a lot of hate.
But at what cost?
Exactly.
But at what cost? At what cost am I like living with this like hidden thing away from everyone? Because on top of that, I'm also not really dealing with it. I'm not engaging with this whole experience of my life if I'm just kind of trying to shove it under a rug and never talk about it with anybody. And so when I eventually came out, people were calling my Anglican priest friend. They were like, "Hey, you need to go talk to him," because he was the closest one. And but they wouldn't call me directly. They would call him and say, "Hey, you need to go have a chat with Stephen," and all this other stuff that was just crazy. And I was, but what I experienced from that was, a lot of anxiety at first and a little bit of pushback, but I also found connection to other people who thought and felt the same way that I did. I was getting messages from people who were just like, "Hey, I completely resonate with everything you just said. And this has been something in my life that I've been trying to wrestle out all on my own. And I don't even know where to go." And I think honesty and openness eventually leads to the freedom and that true bliss that we are looking for. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Tom, don't judge these people before you meet them. So, I mean, you're assuming that you're going to go out and these people are going to judge you. Don't do it. You know, be open.
Let them shoot themselves in the foot. Don't do it for them.
Don't shoot yourself.
Yeah. I mean, right now it's just like one person. I mean, part of the reason I joined the Catholic Church was because you could kind of just go attend a mass and leave, and it's very different than like the Baptist church. They kind of want you to hug each other and get more like involved. And yeah. So now what I'm doing with this, I can attend on a Sunday for an hour, or even 30 minutes on a daily mass, get my like shot in, and then kind of
your Catholic vaccine, right?
My Catholic vaccine. Because if I go to confession, a different priest is going to tell me a different thing. Like one priest will tell me masturbation is just completely out of the question. Another will say like, "Oh, it's more akin to an addiction," and like if you're addicted to it, you can still take communion, and then one priest might say that it's completely fine, So I kind of like the Catholic Church because it's for me, it feels more free than being under like a particular pastor. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's just how it is for me. As I explore these topics, because if I was in the Baptist church right now, or the Pentecostal church, just whoever the spiritual alpha would just be like, "Look, Tom, what you're doing is going to lead to perdition, and they're going to try to tell you the end from the beginning, and they don't want you to walk through the process at all." So like, obviously, like Stephen, what you're saying, they're going to just say, "Well, that leads to Sodom and Gomorrah, and the fruits are going to be, hell and all these other things." There's no room for the exploratory, which is really lame.
Unfortunate.
It's just kind of it's why they're so boring, because they know everything and they try to tell you the end from the beginning before you even start.
Yeah, it's amazing how many people seem to think they know you better than you know yourself. And
yeah. I mean, like for me, like just like these. So I was a virgin until 29, Stephen, like two months ago, and like just verses would jump out to me. Like one in Ecclesiastes that said, like why be so righteous, and destroy yourself. It actually says that in the book of Ecclesiastes. Like it says, "Why be wicked and die before your time?" But it says, "Why be so righteous and destroy yourself?" And I felt that,
Camel.
The camel. Well, there you go. I felt like this really lame camel that was just miserable all the time with my pent up sexuality. And I was just living, I just was a mess. And now I feel a lot more balanced. There's new problems, but it feels like progress. So like if like, bisexuality, that's another jump, that's not something that I'm like geared towards, but it's the same concept of like, we want to explore these truths, and there's even like, you find wholesomeness in it. Like you find like, this is leading me somewhere good, like like maybe within the next like day, week, month, year. Because at church they want to tell you, well, this is going to lead you to hell at the end of your life, so you never begin that journey. But
Correct.
So that's how I ended up a 29-year-old virgin, because I'm like, well, if I date one of these girls, I'm just going to end up in hell. And so I don't experience anything at all, waiting for God to drop a wife in my lap, and I end up a 29-year-old virgin. And that's not what God intended. Like, that's not, what was happening in the Bible or whatever. Like, that's just as messed up, and it's a whole lot less fun.
Amen.
Yeah, man. So I'm jumping into this, like I'm slaying fatties and different
Good.
experiences.
Get some dumpster diving going.
You got to start where you're at, man. Every journey starts with the first step. So
Tom, the one piece of advice I have for you, bro, is I caught your interview about, you really felt God led you to be free of that kind of Puritanism and engage.
I feel like it was God.
Absolutely. I will say continue to trust the Christ in you to lead you through this season, because like I say, anything that we've had pent up for a period of time and you get that release, we tend to go a little crazy. It tends to look pretty extreme.
Rumspringa.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Boom, the dams break and there's flooding everywhere and somebody's got to clean up the mess. But the truth is, the seed of Christ is still in you. So eventually comes a point where you gain self-control, which is a fruit of the Spirit, and you do get a cap on it. You're not going to be screwing everybody's daughter and going after every woman in the... Relax.
Okay.
God brought you to it. He'll take you through it. Trust the Christ in you, my friend. And find peace. If this is bringing you peace and you feel that you're better and centered and balanced, that's the best sign of all. That's the best confirmation you could hold, because at least you're being true to yourself. And that's the same thing. You and in God, right? It's union. You are in union with God. There is no separation.
Yeah.
So being true to the desires of your heart and being true to the peace in yourself is the same thing as hearing and aligning with the word of God for your life.
Thank you, brother. I received that.
Amen. Awesome. Awesome having you on, man.
All right.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, we're probably going to need to start wrapping it up. But Tom, thanks for coming on and chatting the chat. We always appreciate it. We always learn something. So you have a very unique perspective.
Yeah. I think we all kind of do here. To be
fair. That's the point, right? At the end of the day.
Yeah. Well, awesome, guys. You have a great one.
All right, you too, Tom. All right, so we're a little bit over time, I think. So we can do our final thoughts. Thank you so much, Steven, for coming on. This was
my pleasure.
Yeah, it was a very eventful podcast, I think. Beyond expectations. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Glad I could be a part of it. Yeah. This was a lot of fun.
All right.
I'm going to go schedule trucks for water now. So.
Oh, awesome.
Next week, whose channel are we on?
Next week?
Yeah, next week.
I think it's you. You usually go after me.
Okay, back on mine. Okay, no problem.
Yep. Awesome. All right. Well, do you guys got any final thoughts, last words before we say adieu?
No 10K Rum podcast today with me and Amos, because Amos is partying in Ohio. So next week will be our 100th episode. Everybody tune in, subscribe to the channel, the 10K Rum channel. And we look forward to having the chat next week.
Awesome. And Steven, I know you might have an upcoming media engagement as well. I don't know if you want to talk about that and pitch it.
Well, first of all, anyone's welcome to follow me on Twitter. It's Stefano Verde. But I am starting a podcast called Soul and Tonic, Spirituality on the Rocks. Cliche little thing. But it's this whole conversation about spirituality and philosophy, like me sitting down with people, hearing their stories and just kind of engaging with where they're at. So with that comes with conversations with someone who's a former worship leader and kind of understanding his path of spirituality, and then also wanting to sit down with the Norse pagan and all these different people from different walks of life and just kind of see what spirituality looks like for them, but also engage with a few different philosophical points. Like I have my friend Ryan, who is going to be getting on there with me and having a conversation about intrinsic versus extrinsic faith and what does that look like, and compulsory faith behaviors versus what we're talking about, like understanding stuff from the outside and bringing it into our lives. So different stuff like that. So I'm wanting to start up this interesting podcast within the next few weeks. So,
yep, awesome,
Fantastic.
and that's Soul and Tonic, right?
yeah, Soul and Tonic.
Is that going to be YouTube, Spotify? Where are you going to put it on? Do you know?
I'm actually planning on doing it through Anchor.
Anchor,
So,
okay,
Anchor.fm.
awesome.
I only have one camera at the moment because I'm also a photographer, and I use it for doing a lot of different art pieces and stuff. And for now, I want to do a more audio-based system rather than getting into all the video stuff. But that I plan to eventually start integrating as well through the YouTube. So
Fantastic.
Awesome. Yeah, man. Well, yeah, this is Religion 015. Thank you all for coming, watching. Feel free to watch the replay. I'll put all of Steven's links. I just put one in the chat, but I'll put them in the box below if you guys are watching the replay. All right. You all have